Բարերեգո սիրելի հարնագիցներ, ինչպես ամեն շաբաթ երեգո կմիանանք ուղի եթերով, այսօր պիտի շարունակենք մեր հաղորդաշարը, խոսելով կարևոր նյութի մասին, ինչպես որ շատերուդ հայտարարեցինք, որ պիտի ունենանք հյուրը եւ պիտի ունենանք այսօր անգլերեն լեզվով մեր հյուրը, ուրեմն մենք այսօր պիտի խոսենք Մարկ Դենքոֆի հետ, որ այսքի առաջ 1-2 անգամ այստեղ են հաղորդումներ ունեցել է եւ պիտի խոսենք իրեն հետ այսօրվա հաղորդաշարը։ Այսօր մենք կարևոր նյութի մասին պիտի խոսենք անգլերեն լեզվով, համաշխարհային կետնի վրա ինչ կգադարվի որ քաղաքականությունը միջին արևելքեն սկսած մինչև Եվրոպա եւ Ռուսաստան։ Բայց նախքան անցնենք հայտակրին այսօրվա սպոնսորին գուզեմ շնորհակալություն հայտնել Justice Unlimited, որ այսօրվա սպոնսորն է այս ծրագրամի Justice Unlimited սպասվի investigation of paralegal personal injury legal document assistance հավասի կդեսնակ հեռախոսի թիվը այսօրվա սպոնսորը Justice Unlimited-ն է շնորհակալություն գայտնենք Justice Unlimited-ին որ մեզ այս ծրագրամը սպոնսոր կգնա այսօր իսկ հալով մեր գլխավոր հարցերուն պիտի սկսեմ խոսել եւ ծանոթացնել Mark Dankof-ի վերաբերյալ Mark Dankof-ը նախկին United States Senate-ի candidate էր, աստվածապան journalist եւ political analyst գնե press TV վրա կամ դարբեր մեծ հերոստացույցերու վրա իր մեկ քաղաքական գարզիկներ գարնեն. Well, Mark Dankof, thanks for coming this late hour on our program and willingly coming and talking to us. Giving your opinions and your ideologies and your theological angles of this issue. Thank you very much one more time for being with us.
Mark, what's going on in the world, and arguably since February of 2014, things have gotten progressively worse, and I anticipate that trend is going to continue as we approach the 2016 American presidential elections.
Can you repeat it again? Because you were cut off for some reason. Can you repeat it from beginning, please?
Sure. From the beginning, I was simply saying that things have gotten appreciably worse since February of 2014 in regards to world trends that we've been noting on this show. And I expect this worsening of trends to continue as we approach the 2016 American presidential elections.
So let's start with the topic that is very important for us to all think about and talk about because we're right now we're in 2015 and we're facing more wars actually it looks like and I would like you to little bit explain about your analysis on Middle East issue, what is taking place and why this war has not ended yet.
Well, I think it hasn't ended for several reasons. The most important, of course, and you and I agree on this because we're both Christians. When you start looking at this in terms of biblical eschatology, it's very clear that we are, in all likelihood, at the end of history. The various things that Jesus says about wars, rumors of war, in Matthew chapter 24, the Olivet Discourse, I think apply here. And if we simply look at this in terms of secular political analysis, certainly the wars in the Middle East since the first Gulf War, launched by George Herbert Walker Bush, has had us in a situation in the last quarter of a century where there has truly been nothing but war and rumor of war and interventionism on the part of the American Zionist political machine. And these trends beget new wars and new conflicts all the time. The latest flashpoint, of course, is the situation in the Ukraine, courtesy of February of 2014 and the Victoria Nuland-led coup that took place in Kiev that installed a regime there that was favorable both to the European Union and to the United States and to the State of Israel. Since that time, things have gotten progressively worse, both in the Ukraine, especially in the eastern part of that country, where there has been a full-fledged program of ethnic cleansing being directed against Russian ethnics in a number of major cities in the east in that country. And the other thing, of course, that continues to worsen is the ongoing relationship between the United States on the one hand and Vladimir Putin's Russia on the other. And I think that would be a particularly dangerous situation in conjunction with what's already been going on since 1990, especially with these American military interventions in the Middle East. So overall, I think it's a very, very frightening picture, and one that's especially disturbing because of the number of media lies that are being perpetrated in the West, and especially in the United States, by Fox News and CNN and all the usual culprits that have been giving the American public a false understanding of what has happened in the Ukraine, a false understanding of what is going on in Syria, and a false understanding of why the United States continues to be embroiled both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and why we continue some very bellicose, threatening policies as it pertains to the Iranian regime. So this,
Mark, I would like to ask you a specific question, because I want to go section by section, area by area, continent by continent, basically. I want to start with the wars that and the rumors of the wars that has been started by the media, U.S. media, false accusations, false, all kinds of videos, and all those wars have been based on false accusations of governments. What is it that they are looking for specifically? Is it something? Does this have something to do with the New World Order policy, and they have to draw new maps? I mean, I would like the audience to understand more clearly on this issue.
well, I think when you look at this whole situation, it's very obvious that these wars and rumors of war, based upon false information, false flag incidents, and false spins in the American Western news media in regard to who has been involved with what and why, the ultimate goal in all of this, it seems to me, is to produce a global government, a world government.
Right.
And the Bible, of course, is very specific on this, both in the Olivet Discourse as well as in what Paul tells us about the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, as well as what John tells us in the Apocalypse in Revelation 13, among other places in the Apocalypse. And we're looking at all of this and asking who is behind this this drive toward a world global government. This is where we get into where you and I would diverge completely with our pro-Zionist colleagues within the American Christian right. You and I are believing evangelical Christians. You're a Nazarene. I'm a Lutheran. We both are very much, and I think this is fair to say, we are anti-Zionist for some very, very legitimate reasons, not the least of which is not simply the criminal methodology of the Zionist regime as it established itself in Palestine in the late 1940s, and all of the things that they have done since, which we've talked about on this show from time to time. But at rock bottom level, the Zionist ideology is a racist ideology. It is an ideology which emphasizes a Jewish racial supremacism coming not from the Christian New Testament, but coming from the Babylonian Talmud. This is something that has been rehashed by many fine people over a long period of time. And ultimately, people need to understand that Zionism is not simply about having a Jewish state, a Jewish political entity in Palestine that includes a complete Jewish takeover of all of Jerusalem. It certainly is that, but it's much larger than that. David Ben-Gurion himself alluded to this in a Life magazine interview in the very early 1960s, where he as much as said that the vision that he had for a Jewish homeland in Palestine ultimately involved a situation where the Jews operating in a Zionist state of Israel that had a unified Jerusalem as its capital would proceed to engage in some sort of world global administration of the affairs of all the individual nations. He was very careful in what he said, but it was very easy to read between the lines and to see that, in fact, he was providing the world with a roadmap of where this Zionist movement was headed. And when we look at the direction that things have gone in my lifetime, it's very obvious that this is the case. And when we ask who wins in this game of these ongoing American military interventions in the Middle East under false pretenses and all these wars of occupation and counterinsurgency that we are involved in, and certainly since 9/11, Mr. Bush's war on terror that has now become Mr. Obama's war on terror. And of course, we're seeing the latest manifestations of this policy in what has been going on with this Charlie Hebdo circus in Paris, France recently. It's quite obvious that this New World Order has an overwhelming amount of Jewish support and an overwhelmingly amount of Jewish money behind it. But it's also a question of bringing all of the media organizations of the world to heel in terms of what they can and cannot discuss on the air, and where you have a certain type of pro-Zionist, pro-Marxist political and cultural correctness that is being enforced by all of these major media players. It's quite obvious to see that this is the drive that the Bible was speaking of when it was making reference to a system of global governance with terminology about the man of perdition, the terminology about the beast, the terminology about the so-called whore of Babylon, quoting John in the Apocalypse. This is all tied up in this. And unfortunately, a good percentage of what we call evangelical Christianity in the United States and in the West has not understood or has not wanted to understand the extent to which this cultural and moral takeover of our societies in this movement away from the sovereignty of individual nation states in the interest of creating a so-called international global order is a predominantly Zionist ideology that is going on here. And I saw something on Facebook recently that I think underscores the point. Henry Kissinger, at one point in his lengthy career, has made the statement that anyone who does not support this new international order, and by that he definitely was referencing the term New World Order without using it, Dr. Kissinger said that such opponents of this post-World War II new international order could be defined as terrorists or as people who are potential supporters of terrorism. And of course, this is where all the Islamophobia comes in that we've been seeing reported constantly in the Western electronic and print media. It also explains why, when we take a closer look at the war on terror, is that is now being supported and has been supported since 9/11 in the United States, that the involvement of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith in helping the federal government of the United States put together these profiles of so-called domestic terrorists that would be made available by our federal government to our state and local law enforcement agencies and to the American military is painting a far different picture of the so-called potential terrorist from what one might imagine. When one reads this material that emerged in, I believe it was 2008, the presidential election of 2008 in this country, in the state of Missouri, it was quite obvious that the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith in the Federal Department of Homeland Security in the United States were putting together briefing papers for Missouri state law enforcement that were basically describing those who were supporters of political candidates in the United States like Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul and Chuck Baldwin of the Constitution Party could be fairly seen as terrorists or potential terrorists, having a terroristic proclivity because they're not on board with supporting this system of global governance, and because they tend to be people who do not favor homosexual marriage. They tend to be people who are pro-life on the abortion issue, tend to be people who don't like the federal government telling them what they and their churches are going to believe and not believe, and what it is that their pastors and priests are going to be proclaiming from the pulpit. So as we watch this whole thing unfolding in Paris with this Charlie Hebdo situation, it becomes very clear that this whole business of freedom of speech and protecting freedom of speech only pertains to some people, but not everyone. And for those who criticize the Zionist state of Israel, for those who question any aspect of the official establishment story in the West on World War II and how it happened and how it was fought, anyone who questions the now established political correctness in the West on issues like homosexual marriage and abortion on demand is increasingly being labeled as a terrorist or potential terrorist, increasingly being labeled as someone who is antisocial, who is out of step with the mainstream. And of course, there are people who have names that in some cases we would know and recognize, who have been imprisoned in European countries and in Australia for simply contradicting the party line on the Zionist state of Israel and how it came together and what its ideological goals and purposes are, and just what did and didn't happen in the manifestation that we know as the Second World War. So this is very serious business, and it's to me, I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I start listening to some of these people talk about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, because again, this business going on in Paris, which by the way, I happen to agree with Ron Paul, and I happen to agree with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, that in all likelihood what we are looking at in this situation was a false flag incident that was perpetrated in France for purposes related to those who have been behind this New World Order drive all throughout the events of the last century.
Well, I could clearly understand what you're saying, and I would emphasize on more, specifically on the last word you said, freedom of speech. Well, freedom of speech is allowed only within the box of New World Order, within the limits and within the curriculum of the New World Order. Out of those New World Order policies, any other freedom of speech is called anti-hater or anti-terrorist or whatever the name they want to give. So there is no such a thing, freedom of speech, because all these New World Order policies took birth in Germany, Frankfurt School of German. If we recall, all those ideologies, philosophies, psychologies took birth in specifically, and they had a specific reason which they are achieving now, we see. But also, if we go about 50 years before, or 30 or 40 years before, the whole world stood while the Armenian genocide was taking, and nobody did anything. Nobody moved a finger to help the Armenian people. And until today, since the genocide is not recognized and it is played with, they are going to continue genociding different races, different cultures, bombing countries, because the first genocide of a race was never recognized. They've been playing with words. What would you say on that one?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think the reason it has not been formally recognized in all of the places where it should have been involves simple politics. As far as Turkey goes, which clearly perpetrated this genocide in the first part of the 20th century, that you have all kinds of foreign powers in Europe, you have the United States, and frankly, you have Russia and other outside powers that have to do business with Turkey, and from time to time have decided that in order to be effective in implementing whatever their own policies are going to be with the Turkish government, that they want to tread particularly lightly in that area. But there's another reason, and that is that in the West, we are told that the so-called Holocaust of an alleged 6 million Jews is a heinous act in history that qualitatively and quantitatively is bigger than anything else that has ever happened in history. It dwarfs anything else that has happened in history. It has been perpetrated by an evil all out of proportion to anything else that has ever happened in human history. And I simply think that that's propaganda. It's historically false. It's historically distorted. And when you start talking about an Armenian genocide, the very use of the term genocide to apply to what happened to the Armenians in the early years of the 20th century is something that the Zionist lobby is not at all comfortable with, because, again, its utilization of whatever did and didn't happen in the Second World War for its own purposes was virtually the basis for creating the political climate for their takeover of Palestine in the late 1940s, and perpetrating certain mythologies ever since. In regard to the fact that Jewish suffering and the horrors done to Jews are, again, qualitatively and quantitatively greater than those experienced by anyone else in human history. I believe that that's false. And I believe that, of course, we talk about things in that manner, and when we allow the debate to be framed in that way, then it becomes politically incorrect. Whether we're talking about the Armenian genocide in the first part of the 20th century, or we're talking about the Zionists blowing up the King David Hotel in 1946, their role in the Lavon affair in 1954, their role in deliberately shooting up the USS Liberty in the Six-Day War of 1967, their role in the Jonathan Pollard and A.A.C.O spy cases, their role in stealing the raw materials for their nuclear program from the United States in an espionage operation that we now understand that Benjamin Netanyahu himself was actually a part of. This is all involved in why this Armenian situation is consistently downplayed in the West, and why the situation involving Adolf Hitler and involving world Jewry in the 1930s and 40s continues to receive the level of attention that it does, to the exclusion of virtually anything else. And of course, when we get into the creation during the George W. Bush first term of this global anti-Semitism monitoring department for the American State Department, and start reading what that's all about, we start discovering that according to the United States government, it is quote-unquote anti-Semitic, whatever that term is supposed to mean. It is anti-Semitic to say that the New Testament demonstrates that the death of Jesus Christ was the result of a conspiracy of the Jewish religious leadership. That is clearly what the Testament does teach. According to the American State Department, it is anti-Semitic to discuss the disproportionate Jewish role in promoting the abortion industry, the pornography industry in the West, and supporting the homosexual rights agenda in the Western world and in the United States specifically, when all of the available evidence can be amassed to show that, in fact, that's exactly what all of these movements are, and that the Jews have used these movements as a means of subverting the older Christian cultures of the West, and inflicting upon them a level of moral damage and demographic damage that would make them far more amenable candidates to going into a global order that is under their control. Absolutely. And this we can extend certainly to the outlandish coverage that is going on of this situation in the Ukraine. The average American does not understand that the United States government, with Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland, utilized $5 billion in covert American money to support the overthrow Yanukovych regime there in Kiev. Whether we like that regime or not, they were duly and legitimately elected. And what the American people do not understand that these American and European bankers in the Zionist constituency were the main players in overthrowing this government as a means of continuing, of course, to steal whatever natural resources could be stolen, as a means of bringing the government of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine under the iron fist and the iron boot of the European Union's banking system, which includes, of course, the International Monetary Fund, which played a major, major role in the overthrow of the Yanukovych regime in Kiev. But what we are also seeing is a complete blackout, for the most part, of all of these atrocities that this American, EU, Israeli-backed government has been perpetrating in the eastern part of Ukraine, which has involved basically genocidal policies that differ with those pursued by the Turks against the Armenians, only in terms of the scale of the deaths involved in the latter situation. When you look at what happened, just for an example, in the burning of this trade union building in Odessa, which killed scores of innocent people, literally fried them to death. These were largely Russian ethnic people that were murdered in this act, and the people who perpetrated this heinous, heinous murder were people who were connected with this Kiev regime that the United States and Israel and the EU installed. The average American has not had that explained to he or she. And if we are listening to what Barack Obama is talking about and what the bought and paid for political leadership of both of the major political parties in the United States is talking about, and the way that the Rupert Murdoch-owned Fox News and CNN and Wolf Blitzer are talking about in spinning this Ukrainian situation, you would believe that the Russian government of Vladimir Putin was an aggressor in the Ukraine. You would believe that all the criminal activities and actions that have been undertaken in that country since February of last year have been perpetrated by the Russians, when the exact opposite is true. We are truly living in an Orwellian time where the average citizen of this country is not thinking and is not reading and is not consulting the kinds of sources that would enable he or she to be an informed person within the context of an informed electorate. The fact of the matter is that the incredible propaganda that is being perpetrated right now against Putin's Russia and that is being perpetrated in regard to what is going on in the Ukraine is terrifying to watch, and gets into all of the lies that have been told up to this point in regard to this so-called Syrian civil war,
Right.
so-called, and the lies that have been told in regard to why the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, why we invaded Afghanistan in 2001, and of course, most controversial of all, and I'm one of the people who has gone on record with this, the United States government, in my view, has put out a false report, a totally controlled report, a report controlled by Israeli American citizens that were assigned with governing what was and was not going to be investigated in this 9/11 Commission report. The American public has basically bought a pack of lies in regard to who was behind this 9/11 attack, how it was done, who benefited from that 9/11 attack. And when we answer that question, then we're well on our way to understanding who is benefiting by what is going on in Syria, what has been perpetrated in Libya, who is benefiting by this ongoing American occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, who is benefiting by stirring up all this trouble in Syria, who is benefiting by what has happened in Ukraine since February of last year. This is the sort of thing, of course, that you and I talk about in a show like this, or what I would be talking about on Press Television Iran, or talking about with Mark Glenn in an edition of The Ugly Truth. But this is the sort of thing that American Zionist corporate media is not going to allow to be discussed. on Wolf Blitzer's CNN or Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. It
But
simply isn't going to happen.
but Mark, you've been on CNN, you've been on Fox News, you were interviewed, and you've been on many times on Press TV.
Yes.
You were invited to those programs, and I've heard you specifically. You spoke very bluntly, the same way you're speaking right now, and you even had a debate with a member of, I believe it was State Department. I remember that program specifically on CNN, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen you on many other programs. I would like to ask you one question. Do you think the real Republican Party, Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul, you, will have a chance to take this country over and run it like it used to constitutionally?
I don't think it's going to happen. And the reason I don't, I've been involved in that wing of the Republican Party for a long time. And then, of course, that wing of the Republican Party, especially the Buchanan wing of the Republican Party, was very much involved in my dalliance in the so-called Constitution Party for a time in the late 1990s and very early years of the 21st century, Howard Phillips Constitution Party. I don't think it's going to happen, and the reason I don't is the kind of script that continues to be written for the Republican Party by the New World Order managers is one that the public seems to buy every time. And what do I mean by that? Well, whether you're looking at the Buchanan movement in the Republican Party, which ended up spawning the Constitution Party, which has been a dismal failure, by the way, that's a topic for another show, or whether you're talking about the Ron Paul people and the Ron Paul presidential candidacy that I think clearly spawned the so-called Tea Party movement. Both of those movements have been co-opted by pro-Zionist elements that have twisted things in a way that guarantees that the average American conservative with the best of intentions who is confused and manipulated is someone who is going to find himself or herself voting for a fraud the next time out. Now, let's look at the Republican Party agenda as it's beginning to unfold here in this next year, because keep in mind the first primary is only 1 year away in New Hampshire. What are we seeing? Well, what we are seeing is you have the Republican establishment giving us Jeb Bush this time. The Republican establishment may be getting ready to trot Mitt Romney out a second time. And then you have conservatives who will be running in the Republican primaries early on, especially dealing with the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucuses. Those are two very, very critical early developments. You'll have Dr. Ben Carson, this African-American surgeon with a Johns Hopkins University background. He is starting to get a lot of attention from the Christian right. Mike Huckabee, the Fox News guy and the former governor of Arkansas, will be in there too. And those guys, of course, especially Huckabee, represent an overtly pro-Zionist perspective that indicates that they're bought and paid for. And then the candidate that disturbs me the most is, frankly, Rand Paul, Ron Paul's son. Mm-hmm. Now, Rand Paul started out looking like a clone of his father, and yet I will be frank with the people that are watching, listening to this show tonight, I was not that impressed at all with Ron Paul's last run for the presidency, although he was the best thing that was going in the Republican Party, certainly in 2012. And the reason I was disenchanted, Ron Paul pulled a lot of punches in his campaign for the Republican presidential nomination when he was challenged by Rudolph Giuliani on national television to back off of some things that Ron Paul had said about the relationship between 9/11 and blowback. It seems to me that Ron Paul at that point should have been taking the gloves off, should have been coming after Rudolph Giuliani, and should have been coming after this pro-Zionist, pro-New World Order, neoconservative element that hijacked the American right after World War II and used outlets like William F. Buckley's National Review and Human Events to do it, and then subsequently to cover the tone of the debate within the Republican Party to where by 1992, the Republican Party, with a single exception of Patrick Buchanan, was seen to be singing the same tune in regard to being pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, and in regard to saying some good things on some of the social issues, but being very, very careful not to identify who the people are that have been on the far left of these issues in this country since the end of World War II. And even within the Buchanan wing of the party, I was discovering that many people were reticent to really identify these Frankfurt School Institute of Social Research types that had perverted American culture, and certainly when we, with some of the good things that the Buchanan and Paul people were saying about the Federal Reserve Board and how corrupt Wall Street is, nonetheless, there tended to be with both of these guys, especially Ron Paul, a real reluctance to talk about identifying who these people are and who and what it is that they disproportionately represent. For example, I can just see being accused of being an anti-Semite if I was running for the presidency of the United States by merely telling the American people that the current chair and vice chair of the Federal Reserve Board are both heavyweight, long-time heavyweights in running the Bank of Israel. Is this an accident? I don't think that it is, and it's just the tip of the iceberg in identifying the movement that
Գաբը գդրվեցավ, չեմ գիտեր ինչի համար, եթե connection-ը գնաց հաջիկ ետ միացեք, կարևոր կարծես թե այդ բարի վրա մի անգամ են գաբը գդրվեցավ։ Եթե կարելի է հետ միացեք Mark, are you on? Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, are we back on?
Yeah, I'm gonna speak from here. It's okay because I don't know what's going on down there.
Okay.
You were. It's a very. I don't know if it's a coincidence because the word when you said they both run Bank of Israel, we were cut off immediately.
I don't think it is a coincidence, and I will simply say this, that in a variety of different talk shows around the world that I have been on, when we really start identifying the hidden hand that is involved in all of these things, including 9/11 and including the current chairman and vice chair of the Federal Reserve Board, who are both longtime weights for the Bank of Israel, that tends to cause things to get disconnected. And I would simply remind people that here in San Antonio, where I live, San Antonio, Texas, the international division of the National Security Agency that monitors the internet is right here in town. So I'm sure we have all kinds of listeners tonight.
Okay, I'm going to take one telephone call, and we are going to see what the audience has to ask. After which we're going to go directly to issues of Syria. Hi, Rametsek.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
I'm going to speak English, okay?
Go ahead. We're all speaking English.
Thank you. I was listening to this guy who was talking just now, the speaker, and it's very, very clear that he's very anti-Semitic.
Oh, he's anti-Semitic, okay.
Yeah, anti-Semitism is against the law in America, first of all.
Thank you very much, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Second of all, if he calls himself a Christian, he goes to church and he prays to a Jewish God.
Okay, we're not going to get in details on that one. Now let's move to, now that you are called anti-Semitic, we're going to move to the next question. Let's get into the situation of Syria. It's very important to speak about Syria because at the beginning of 2011, the war started, and they called it Arab Spring, and we see it still continues. The war is still going on. I'm going to take one more phone call, please. Hi, Rametsek.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Yeah, Rametsek.
I'm wondering why.
Can you speak?
Wondering why people, when they criticize someone, for example, Mel Gibson or others, they just a little bit criticize Israelis or lobbyists or Jewish, and everybody says anti-Semitism. And second one, why all American chiefs and chairmen and money and Alan Greenspan, Shalom Bernanke, no Ellen, all of them, and security like from Caspar Weinberger or Alan.
We understand that.
Or Jews.
Okay.
I don't know why. Can you explain?
Maybe we don't have the right of the freedom of speech. I mean, this is what we were talking about. This is why this program I wanted to explain, and this is why we explain this widely. Anytime you talk out of the box, you don't have the right to do the freedom of speech. It's called something else, and we just heard it from a caller from out of state or out of from Northern California. But it's okay. Everybody has an opinion to call anybody a name. It doesn't matter. The truth is the truth, and if you're analyzing a situation, it doesn't mean you hate that person. You're just analyzing the truth, and there is no danger in analyzing. I will take one more phone call, and we're going to go to the next question of geopolitical stand in Middle East. Ayora Metzek.
Բարում Bedros, կուզեի հարցնել մեր հյուրին, անունս Միքայել է, կուզեի հարցնել մեր հյուրին about the classified 28 pages that was scripted out during the Bush 43 administration, and what would his opinion be on this specific issue? And my second question, if you don't mind, about the Glass-Steagall. I heard that a couple of senators have House resolutions on Glass-Steagall, and to basically to put the banks into bankruptcy protection.
Did you hear the question?
Thank you so much.
Did you hear the question?
I think there were two questions. Give me the first one again, Bedros.
The 28-page, Bush had 28-page classification of, did you know anything about it? And the second question was the banks to be bailed out by a House resolution that is on the floor.
Yes, I think we'll take the second one first. In terms of this business of bank bailouts, it seems to me that these ongoing bailouts of these financial institutions are as much a policy in perpetuity as the wars are. And it's a very definite connection between central banking and these wars. There's a very definite connection between central banking and the ability to manipulate other countries' economies, as we're now attempting to do with Russia, but with the utilization of economic sanctions and denying their banks the opportunity, of course, to transfer money to other banks in other parts of the world using our transfer system and so forth and so on. But the Glass-Steagall thing that the caller made reference to is a very, very important thing because, of course, Glass-Steagall was a piece of banking legislation that made a constant differentiation, a very important one, between commercial banking and investment banking, speculative investment banking, so that, for example, those of us, which includes me, who are small savers and small investors and so forth, we used to have a greater degree of protection in our banking system when the banks who were holding our money were prohibited by law from utilizing our money in so-called speculative investments. The removal of the Glass-Steagall, or the repeal of the Glass-Steagall legislation and the kind of deregulation that we began to see in the banking industry from the Reagan era onward was basically designed to make all of us vulnerable to the sorts of things that have happened in recent years involving the need to bail out all of these banking and insurance institutions and brokerage firms and mortgage firms that were involved in grossly irresponsible and, in my judgment, on a moral basis, criminal activities with the money of millions of innocent people. But one can rest assured that in regard to the way that the political system is set up in the United States, that these practices, these evil practices will continue because these powerful central banking interests play a disproportionate role in being one of the major players, not the only one, but one of the major players in being able to buy elections and to ensure that all of the right people on the relevant committees are in their back pocket, that we never see any corrective legislation of any kind. Now, the first question that was asked was about George Bush and some sort of a 28-page redacted document. What does this pertain to?
We're not going to have enough time to ask that question or answer it because because we have only 15 minutes left, and I want to go directly to the geopolitical stand of Middle East right now. What is the relation? What is the connection of geopolitical stand right now? The civil wars and creating Temple of Solomon. Does it have any interconnection with to each other, or it's just a coincidence of wars?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence. Let's take a look at this situation in Syria, for example, and play that off with this Charlie Hebdo thing that happened in France. It is very curious to me that the average American does not seem to understand that this ISIS organization, comprised of all of these Wahhabic Sunni extremists, is largely the creation of the United States, the Zionist state of Israel, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that basically they all had, these three major powers in all of this, desired to overthrow and still desire to overthrow President Assad of Syria is a prelude to setting up an opportunity to attack Iran militarily and also to continue to threaten the southern underbelly of Russia. This is what's behind this, and as we look at this whole business of what has been not a civil war as much as it has been a government, in this case the Assad government in Syria, has been besieged by all of these imported mercenaries into Syria who have been fighting with Western money and Saudi money, and who have been getting their training in locations that involve the direct hands and control of the United States. Look at this latest situation where it now emerges, of course, that you've had 3,000 American troops that continue to be involved in training Iraqis and Kurds, supposedly against these ISIS forces. And yet the latest information that has come out of a couple of responsible news agencies tells us at the same time that you have had in recent days 1,000 American troops that have been earmarked to continue training Syrian rebels in the interest of overthrowing the Assad regime. The first 400 of these U.S. troops are going to be in Qatar. Others will be in Saudi and Turkey, which are the other two major centers which will continue to train these Syrian rebels. And we need not believe in this establishment propaganda that these people are moderates who are being trained. As a matter of fact, the evidence is there, and Tony Cartalucci cited this tonight in a release that he put out on this training program, that 3,000 Syrian rebels already trained by the United States left the so-called Free Syrian Army and joined the ISIS organization. So when we ask why the American government will continue to be doing something like this, it continues to stir up the situation in Syria, which is to the Israelis' liking as well as to the Saudis' liking. It also creates a situation where Israeli activities in Palestine are not being noticed because of all of this diversionary publicity on Syria and diversionary publicity on this Charlie Hebdo situation in Paris. We are not hearing about these renewed attempts, for example, on the part of these Temple Mount people to do whatever they need to do to get rid of the Islamic Al-Aqsa Mosque there and to do what they need to do to reclaim that part of the ancient Temple Mount ground. We're not hearing anything about these expansions of Israeli settlements into all of these so-called occupied territories that no one recognizes as theirs under international law. And we're not hearing anything about the fact that all of these ISIS-affiliated people that supposedly have infiltrated France and have infiltrated Belgium and other places in the Western world to undertake these acts of terrorism have been freely traveling to and from Syria and to and from these Western countries and have been receiving not only American military training in many instances, but have largely been getting on these aircraft and crossing these international borders without so much as any eyebrows being lifted. Now, does anyone really believe that in this post-9/11 national security mania that has been created both in the United States and in Western Europe, that this movement of all of these ISIS-affiliated people to and from Syria into the United States and into Canada and into Europe could possibly be transpiring without the full wink and connivance of the American and European and Canadian governments in question? I don't think so. And again, when we look at this whole business in Syria, Seymour Hersh, the very fine Jewish correspondent, by the way, of New Yorker magazine, told us in 2007 in an essay entitled The Redirection that support of these Sunni Wahhabic extremists by the United States and Saudi and Israel was launched full-blown from 2007 onward, and that the primary target that would be targeted in this whole operation was the Alawite Shia regime of Mr. Assad, not only to break the traditional relationship that regime has had with the Iranian government and with Hezbollah and with Hamas, but it also, this action leaves the 2 million Christians of Syria vulnerable to incarceration, torture, and death potentially if they don't get out of that country. So there's a very fascinating interplay here between this so-called Syrian civil war and what is the larger strategic purpose of the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia in desiring the overthrow of the Assad regime as a prelude to an attack on Iran. And then the more incidents that you have, like this Charlie Hebdo situation in Paris, which cause people to focus on these so-called Islamic extremists, the less attention people pay, not only to what Israel is doing in the occupied territories, not only what these Temple Mount people are doing in trying to this temple, which you and I, Bedros, believe is linked up to the eschatological prophecies of the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. But then also we've got a situation where this Charlie Hebdo incident takes people's eye off the ball in terms of what has really subverted the West, what has really subverted the Western culture, what has brought all of this pornography and homosexuality and abortion into play in these Western countries and in the mainstream Western news media outlets. This is not an accident. These problems were not created by even the Islamic extremists affiliated with this ISIS organization or with Al-Qaeda. This is clearly a problem which has Jewish fingerprints all over it, and I think that that's provably the case. And when we talk about this whole business of anti-Semitism, which was raised by a caller from California earlier this evening, we might want to define what it is that one means by that term. Wilhelm Marr defined it quite well in the latter part of the 19th century. That's not what we're talking about here. We are not talking about despising people or hating people or persecuting people for some racial or genetic reason, but we are talking about opposing what it is that these people are doing, which is the precise reason why our Lord Jesus Christ, in the words that he speaks to the church of Smyrna and the church of Philadelphia in Asia Minor, In Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3, those were the two best churches of the seven. And in both instances, the Lord warns them to beware of the synagogue of Satan. Beware of those who say they are Jews and are not, Jesus says. And by that, he means those who are not a part of the Israel God, as the New Testament understands that, but those who want to fall back on the older Jewish racial supremacy, and those who want to perpetrate all of the things that they perpetrate in the world on that basis.
Well, Mark, you explained it very well. I couldn't have explained it better than that. Thanks for explaining. But before we come to the conclusion, I would like to, because the word anti-Semitism was used, I would like for you to little bit explain who your father was, and I'm sure I should have done it at the beginning of the show, but at the program. But knowing that people heard you before, I didn't think I needed to do that. And I would like to thank all the audiences from overseas that were watching this program tonight. We know a lot of people from overseas are watching right now. Who was your father? What role he played in American politics or military?
He was not involved in American politics per se, but certainly as an American military man. He was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. Then he was part of the United States Air Force from the time that became a separate branch of the American military in 1947. He played a major role in the logistical support of the American air war over North Vietnam, which were he alive today, he would acknowledge was a tragedy from the beginning. He was, for a number of years, from, say, 1955, when I was born, through 1967, an American intelligence officer with an organization called the Air Force Technical Applications Center, or AFTAC. Now, that organization...
we're cut off again. Now we're cut off completely. Let me try one more time. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so you said the name of the organization we were cut off.
Yes, AFTAC, Air Force Technical Applications Center, but they were running the U-2 spy program all throughout the Cold War, both for the CIA and for the Atomic Energy Commission. And so my dad was involved from, say, 1955 through 1967 in a lot of their activities, which, of course, included the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let me say one other, because I know we're pressed for time here. I think that with various geopolitical developments that we've been talking about, both on a secular basis as well as in terms of biblical prophecy, I think that this Ukrainian coup in February of 2014 and what that has done to the American relationship with Russia has sped up, in all likelihood, the prophetic timetable. There's an organization called South Front. I don't know much about these people, but I follow them on Facebook. They're based somewhere in Russia. They provide a lot of news commentary and photographs and videos of, from their perspective, what has been going on in eastern Ukraine. This South Front organization is worth taking a look at on Facebook. And along with that, take a look at some of these other very fine alternative media sources, which clearly are covering for us the implications of the rise to power of this BRICS organization, this Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa organization that clearly has as its goal, for some very understandable reasons, the desire to replace the American dollar as the reserve currency of the world, the Russian adaptation of their own SWIFT system for the transfer of monies from one international bank to another is something worth watching. We didn't even scratch the surface of this terrifically important development, I think, Bedros, in recent days, and that is the Russian decision to stop shipping their gas through Ukraine, but to, in fact, ship it to Turkey, where presumably other European countries would have to build pipelines toward Turkey in order to get this gas that they were getting before.
Well, Mark,
and then,
we have come to the conclusion of the program. They're signaling me our time is up already. I would like to thank you, and we are going to continue with these interviews with you. It's not going to take a long time to interview again, but you can hold on the line while I do my closing statement. Սիրելիներ, ինչպես լսեցիք, բոլորը Մարկ Դենկոֆին անգլերեն լեզվով եւ հաջորդ անգամ նորեն բիդելա, ոչ թե քա շաբաթ, մի քանի շաբաթներ նորեն բիդե հրավիրեն գիրեն, շարունակելու այս նյութը շատ կարեւոր համաշխարհային կառավարության ստեղծման Եդևի ուժերը բավականին այսօր բացատրեց Միացյալ Նահանգներում մեջ են բոլոր աշխարհի շուրջը։ Ուրեմն այս խոսքով գուզեմ փակել այսօրվա ծրագրամը միջև քա շաբաթ ասվածես հետ։